You're working harder than your parents ever did, making more money on paper, and yet you feel further from financial security than they ever were. That's not a personal failure, that's the middle class trap working exactly as designed. The two-income trap. I'm Tom, and this is Tom Thinks. I'm here to cut through the Wall Street jargon and give you the real talk on your money, even if it hurts your feelings a little bit. If you're someone who feels like you're running faster on the treadmill but getting nowhere, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now look, here's what most people don't realize about the middle class trap. It starts with what economists call the two-income trap. Back in the 1950s and 60s, we were sold this dream that a single income could support a family, buy a home, send kids to college, and retire comfortably. That was the middle class promise. But then something happened. Women entered the workforce en masse, which should have made families richer, right? Wrong. Here's the thing, when everyone suddenly had two incomes, it created bidding wars for everything. Housing prices shot up because now families could afford to pay more. Childcare costs exploded because demand skyrocketed. Private school tuition, college costs, everything got bid up. So now you have both parents working, but they're spending both paychecks on these inflated costs. They're not actually richer, they're just running faster to stay in the same place. And here's the real kicker, they're more vulnerable than ever before. Because if one person loses their job, the whole house of cards collapses. There's no backup income, there's no safety net. The stay-at-home parent who could have re-entered the workforce in an emergency, that option is gone. You've traded flexibility for what looks like security but is actually just higher fixed costs. I want you to think about this for a second. A family making $60,000 a year pays about $15,000 in taxes, leaving $45,000. But with inflation, that $45,000 has the buying power of maybe $32,000. It has to cover housing, food, schools, insurance, medical expenses, car payments, vacations, savings, and emergencies. And that's if nothing goes wrong. That's if no one gets sick, no car breaks down, no job is lost. This is the reality of the middle class today. You're not failing, the system is failing you. Countries get stuck too. Now here's where it gets really interesting. This middle class trap isn't just happening to individuals and families. It's happening to entire countries. There's something economists call the middle income trap for nations. Of the 101 economies classified as middle income back in 1960, only 14 had become high income by 2008. That's right, only 14 out of 101. Why? Because these countries get stuck in this awkward middle ground. Their wages are too high to compete with low-wage manufacturing countries, but they haven't developed the innovation capabilities to compete with high-income countries. They can't make cheap stuff anymore, but they can't make the really valuable stuff either. Sound familiar? It should, because this is exactly what's happening to the American middle class. Your wages are too high for the jobs that are being shipped overseas, but you don't have the specialized skills for the high-paying jobs that remain. You're stuck in the middle. And just like these countries, you're facing what's called the Red Queen effect. You remember the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland? She had to run faster and faster just to stay in the same place. That's you. That's the middle class today. You're working harder, getting more education, taking on more debt just to maintain what your parents had with a high school diploma. And here's the brutal truth. The global financial system is stacked against middle-income countries and middle-class individuals alike. Middle-income countries have the least access to crisis finance from the global financial safety net. They can access resources equivalent to only 3% of their GDP, while high-income countries can access about 5.3%. That means when crisis hits, they're more vulnerable. Just like when crisis hits your family, you're more vulnerable because you have less savings, more debt, and higher fixed costs. This isn't a coincidence. This is a pattern. The system is designed to keep you in the middle, working hard, consuming, paying taxes, but never quite getting ahead. The debt noose tightens. Let's talk about debt, because this is where the trap really starts to feel inescapable. Look at what's happening with middle-income countries around the world. Take Tunisia, for example. In just 1 year, their public debt rose by 18 percentage points to almost 90% of economic output. They implemented all the reforms the World Bank and IMF recommended, and they still got crushed. And here's the really messed up part. When these countries need debt relief, they can't get it. The G20 and IMF debt relief initiatives, they're only for low-income countries. Middle-income countries like Tunisia don't qualify, no matter how bad their debt situation gets. Instead, they get austerity measures. Cut spending on public sector salaries, eliminate energy subsidies, Target social spending only at the poorest. And who gets squeezed? The middle class. Now, I want you to think about your own debt situation. Student loans, mortgage, car payments, credit cards. What happens when you hit hard times? Do you get debt relief? Of course not. You get late fees, higher interest rates, collection calls, maybe even bankruptcy. But the banks? They get bailouts. The corporations? They get restructuring. The countries? Well, some of them get help, but not the middle-income ones. They have to be good debtors and keep paying no matter what. And this creates a vicious cycle. You take on debt to get an education to get a better job. The job doesn't pay enough to pay off the debt quickly, so you're stuck making payments for decades. You take on a mortgage because renting feels like throwing money away, but now you're locked into payments that eat up 30, 40, even 50% of your income. You can't save. You can't invest. You can't take risks. You're trapped. And the worst part? This debt isn't even buying you what it used to. A college degree today doesn't guarantee what it did 30 years ago. A house today isn't the wealth-building machine it was for your parents. You're paying more for less and you're borrowing to do it. This is the debt trap, and it's tightening around the middle class like a noose. The innovation gap. Here's what most people don't realize about escaping the middle class trap. It's not about working harder. It's not about getting another degree. It's about innovation. And I don't just mean inventing the next iPhone. I mean developing what economists call productive capabilities. This is the ability to create value that can't easily be replicated or automated. This is why countries like South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore escaped the middle-income trap while most others didn't. They didn't just make stuff. They learned how to make better stuff. They invested in research and development. They built education systems that produced engineers and scientists, not just graduates. They created ecosystems where innovation could thrive. Now, here's the painful question. Are you developing productive capabilities? Or are you just doing a job? Because here's the truth. If your job can be described in a manual, if it can be outsourced, if it can be automated, you're not building productive capabilities. You're just trading time for money. And in today's economy, time is getting cheaper while capabilities are getting more valuable. Look at what's happening globally. China is pouring trillions into their Belt and Road Initiative, not just to build infrastructure, but to avoid their own middle-income trap. They know they can't compete on cheap labor forever. They need to move up the value chain. They need to innovate. And they're doing it with state-led strategies, massive investment in research and development, and a focus on high-tech manufacturing. Meanwhile, what are we doing? We're arguing about politics while our infrastructure crumbles. Our education system fails to keep up, and our middle class gets squeezed. The innovation gap isn't just between countries, it's between individuals. The people who are escaping the middle-class trap aren't working more hours. They're developing skills that are scarce and valuable. They're building networks. They're creating intellectual property. They're solving hard problems. They're not just employees, they're innovators. And here's the really uncomfortable truth. The education system that got you into the middle class won't get you out of it. You need to keep learning, keep adapting, keep developing new capabilities. Because the goalposts are moving. What was innovative 10 years ago is commodity today. What's valuable today will be automated tomorrow. You have to run faster just to stay in the same place, and even faster if you want to get ahead. The Fed squeeze play. Now let's talk about the Federal Reserve, because you can't understand the middle-class trap without understanding monetary policy. The Fed has kept interest rates between 5.25 and 5.5% for 7 consecutive meetings. They're slowing quantitative tightening, reducing the monthly cap on Treasury runoff from $60 billion to $25 billion. They're being cautious, they say. They're balancing the need to combat inflation against risks to economic growth. But here's what that really means for you. High interest rates mean higher mortgage rates. They mean higher car loan rates. They mean higher credit card rates. They mean it's harder to buy a house, harder to start a business, harder to get ahead. Rebels, but they also mean higher returns on savings, right? Well, not really, because inflation is still above the Fed's 2% target. So even with higher interest rates, your money is losing purchasing power. You're getting squeezed from both sides. And here's the really insidious part. The Fed's policies disproportionately hurt the middle class. Why? Because the wealthy have assets that appreciate with inflation, real estate, stocks, businesses. The poor get government assistance that's often indexed to inflation. But the middle class? They have debt that gets more expensive with higher rates and incomes that don't keep up with inflation. They're the ones feeling the squeeze. Look at the housing market. It's constrained by high mortgage rates. First-time buyers can't afford to enter the market. Existing homeowners are locked into their current homes because they don't want to give up their low-rate mortgages. The market freezes. Wealth transfer slows. The middle class gets stuck. And what about business investment? It's been uneven across sectors. Some companies are thriving, others are struggling. But guess who works for those struggling companies? Middle-class workers. Guess who gets laid off when businesses cut back? Middle-class workers. The Fed talks about a soft landing, about moderating economic growth without triggering a severe downturn. But what does that mean for you? It means slower wage growth. It means fewer job opportunities. It means more economic uncertainty, and all while prices remain high. This is the monetary policy squeeze, and it's another piece of the middle-class trap. You're not imagining it. It really is harder to get ahead. The system is working against you, and central bank policy is part of that system. Breaking free. Here's the million-dollar question. How do you escape the middle-class trap? First, you have to recognize that the traditional path, go to school, get a job, buy a house, save for retirement, is broken. That path leads to the trap, not out of it. You need a new strategy. Start by rethinking debt. Not all debt is bad, but most of the debt the middle class carries is consumption debt, not investment debt. Student loans for degrees that don't pay off? That's consumption debt. A mortgage for a house that's more than you need? That's consumption debt. Car loans for new cars that depreciate the moment you drive them off the lot? Consumption debt. Investment debt looks different. It's debt that buys assets that generate income or appreciate in value. It's debt that builds productive capabilities. It's debt that creates options. Next, focus on building productive capabilities, not just earning income. What can you do that's scarce and valuable? What problems can you solve that others can't? What skills can you develop that will be in demand 5 years from now, not just today? This might mean learning to code, starting a side business, developing expertise in a growing field, or building a personal brand. It definitely means continuous learning. Third, diversify your income. The two-income trap showed us that relying on 2 salaries from traditional jobs makes you vulnerable. What about 3 income streams? Or 4? What about passive income? What about income from assets, not just labor? The goal isn't to work more hours, it's to get paid from more sources. Fourth, think globally. The middle class trap is a global phenomenon, which means the solutions might be global too. Can you work remotely for a company in another country? Can you sell products or services internationally? Can you invest in markets outside your home country? The world is bigger than your local economy. Finally, and most importantly, reject average thinking. The middle class trap is fundamentally a trap of average expectations, average efforts, average results. You have to think bigger. You have to aim higher. You have to be willing to take calculated risks. Because here's the truth. The system is designed to keep you average. It's designed to keep you consuming, working, paying taxes, but never building real wealth. Breaking free requires extraordinary thinking, extraordinary effort, extraordinary persistence. It won't be easy, but it is possible, and it starts with recognizing the trap for what it is, not your personal failure, but a systemic design. Once you see it, you can start building your escape plan, one that doesn't rely on the broken promises of the past, but on the real opportunities of the future. The middle class wasn't always a trap. It was once a promise, but that promise has been broken. Now it's up to you to build something better. Something that can't be trapped. Something that gives you real freedom, real security, real wealth. That's the goal. That's the escape. And it starts today.
Found this interesting? Subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it out, and drop your questions or ideas in the comments. Until our next adventure.